what are some of the lessons that we might have here? And one of them is that relatively small numbers of people, that is significantly less than a majority, can cause big changes through either armed insurrection, revolutions, or through nonviolent actions, as Nadia was talking about in Egypt. They may be supported by a large sector of society after they get going, but their initial start and actually the carrying out is still by a minority of people. So that the union movement, what happens, the revolutions in Russia and China, initially in Cuba also, were all carried out by relatively small numbers of people. And then society was brought along. The civil rights movement in the United States, of course, the same thing. So this is one thing to keep in mind. You don't necessarily have to have a majority to start the ball rolling and to have some movement towards change. The second sort of thought I have, or lesson maybe, is that most major changes, whether they're small or large, that don't happen by the normal electoral process. They either happen through revolutions, or they happen by direct action that forces legislators to do something, okay, or they feel threatened, and so by this direct action. So they're not doing it as part of the normal, what a normal legislator would do, okay? For example, you know, just what happened during the 1930s in the United States, the New Deal, the Great Society, the civil rights legislation. The legislators in the United States probably never would have done those things if there hadn't been the agitation, hadn't been the demonstrations, the people in the streets. So that many of these were acceptable. It depends upon which ones we're talking about. But for example, the large capital in the United States is willing to go along with voting rights for African Americans. It didn't threaten their prosperity. As a matter of fact, it may have helped U.S. propaganda with regard to its international role as the United States sees it, the imperial role. But there are a lot of things that happened that were agitated for, that actually happened, were put in place in Europe, in the United States. I can't say for Canada, but I assume here too, which capital really never accepted. That is, the large, wealthy corporations and the wealth holders, if you will, really never accepted. And they wanted to roll it back because they felt it infringed on their ability to make money, or they see profit-seeking opportunities if these are done away with at the government level. That is, if we privatize them. So that their changes can happen, that they don't happen through what you normally think of as the normal legislative process, and changes within electoral democracies can be undone. Okay, so if the wealthy, if the powerful classes feel that things went too far, or they see a way to make money out of undoing them. Okay. An interesting quote from Samir Amin, who Nadia must know of. I think the real reason for the failure of electoral democracy to produce real change is not hard to find. All hitherto existing societies, I wonder where he got that from, have been based on a dual system of exploitation of labor in various forms and of concentration of states' power on behalf of the ruling class. This fundamental reality results in a relative depoliticalization, disacculturation of a very large segment of society, and this result broadly designed and implemented to fulfill the systemic function expected of it is simultaneously the condition for the reproduction of the system without changes other than those it can control and absorb, the conditions of its stability. So that the power structure is able to stay in place and is able to absorb these, and if it doesn't like them, it does away with them. It is willing to accept the electoral process. Okay, so that was sort of the second issue that I saw. The third was, at least in the United States, we had really a disintegration of the left after World War II and the McCarthy period. There was an attack against not just the communists and socialists, but really against, starting in the 1950s and going into the 60s and 70s, against labor also. And so you had then, as part of this disintegration, you had the development of these, what have been called identity politics, where people went to organizations that sort of were interested in and working on issues which meant the most to them. And they may have been on more than one of these, but you had the anti-war, you had the women's movement, you had gay, lesbian rights, you had the civil rights struggles, you had all sorts of various, on the environment, sustainable agriculture, which is one that I'm very familiar with. People went to work in these various organizations. And so this fragmentation really has been one of the roadblocks to the formation of a strong left in the United States, because people they don't see the connections between all of these, between these movements, and to what is causing the problems. Another issue when you get to revolutionary changes is that a highly organized vanguard, small group of people, can, under appropriate conditions, actually very effectively carry out an armed struggle and take control, mobilize maybe a majority of the people around them, and actually conquer power. However, the structure creates many problems later. In essence, the class struggle continues, even following a successful revolution of the old system. This is a quote from Mao. Throughout, he said, we're going to have a very long historical process of socialism. Throughout this stage, the class struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat goes on, and the question of who will win between the roads of capitalism and socialism remains, as does the danger of restoration of capitalism. So one of the big issues is, how do you get this vanguard under the control of the people? In other words, okay, maybe you need some leadership, maybe you need a vanguard in order to take control in an armed struggle scenario. But then how do you get control over these people? And in China, by the way, this struggle, to me, this is a very undiscussed part of the Chinese Communist revolutionary period. That one of the major issues really was that exact issue. I don't know if people are familiar with Bill Hinton, who wrote many books on China, and his most famous, I think, is Fan Shen, which is really written about a village before the Chinese Revolution had been completely successful. So he's talking about 1947, before they entered Beijing. So they had control over parts of China, and this was in Shanxi province in northern China. But that book really is about the problems of corruption, which occur relatively quickly within the party cadres at the village level. Okay, so even starting before the revolution, you had this issue. It replayed itself many times, and the last time it replayed itself was really with the Cultural Revolution, which was a last attempt to really get control by people, by the people over the party. Although this is not what's discussed. There are some very interesting book by Han Dongping, which is called The Unknown Cultural Revolution, which, if you're interested in these issues, it's a fascinating book, absolutely fascinating book. So it turned out that Mao was right. There really were capitalist voters in the party. Many people thought he was just, this is just a power struggle. He was trying to get rid of these other people. But the class struggle did continue, even though they were all part of the Communist Party. So who is going to educate the educators? Marx asked that very question. Okay, people change under the situation of changed conditions. Okay, but then you have people who are educating people at that time who were educated under the old conditions. So how do you do that? I mean, that's a very, very difficult issue, and one which I think is with us today as an issue as well. So, so that question of, if you do have a revolutionary struggle and you do have to take power that way, how do you relate the masses so that they can actually control their lives to this bureaucracy that develops? Okay, so I'm trying to shorten this down, and hopefully it makes some sort of sense. Getting to 21st the century and sort of what does this have to do with what's going on right now? And I think it does, by the way. And both issues, I think, have to do with what's going on right now. In Cuba, I know there's a meeting going on right now about Cuba here and about what's happening in Venezuela and in Ecuador and Bolivia as well. So in light of the failure of electoral politics to produce systemic changes in the 20th century, okay, they produced some changes, but not really of the whole system. They're incapable of doing that. What do we make of the changes that are trying to be made in Latin America at this point? Will they be successful in finally transforming their countries from capitalism to a different economic, social, political system, relying on the political process? And to me, this is a very open question. There are lots of potential pitfalls in the process. The process is partially being pushed by activists. I mean, you have leadership that is trying to push the process also, especially Chavez in Venezuela. But there are many, many problems, and activists are playing an independent role. And that whole issue of how activists, although this is not exactly a vanguard party that took control by revolution, but you still have Chavez and his people, you've got Evo Morales and his people, and also to some extent in Ecuador, the same type of situation. You have a bureaucracy and you have a leadership which needs to be interacting and listening to the people, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And they have their own bureaucracies which they may not have control over themselves even. And how can the people actually get control over those democracies? Over those bureaucracies, excuse me. So is there anything to be learned from the Arab Spring movement or the what's happening in North Africa mainly, and the Occupy Wall Street movement, which is now Occupy everywhere? And there's no question about it. It's inspiring to see what happened in Egypt, what happened in Tunisia. It's inspiring to see what's happening in the United States right now. I don't know how much I saw that there's an Occupy Vancouver here, but someone earlier today referred to, they don't have any platform at all, and it's true. It's fairly amorphous, the Occupy movement, but this is a button from Occupy Boston. What do we want? Well, for starters, tax the rich, stop the wars, Medicare and jobs for all. Okay, and then once we get that, we'll work on some other things. So, who would have thought? I mean, not I. Maybe I just don't have enough, imagination to think of these types of things could happen the way they would happen and happen so swiftly. And what's going to happen is still not clear, obviously. I mean, that is what almost goes without saying. As Nadia pointed out, in Egypt, although Mubarak has been overthrown, the power structure is essentially in place. The army is still in its role. The capitalists who have their say are still, in control. And if you can't somehow take on that power structure and literally do away with it, then any types of reforms that you are able to squeeze out of the system can be undone. And so if the goal is not to displace the power of capital with literally the power of the people, then reform projects are going to be limited by the assumption that the current power and economic relations must remain. It is not easy. I think maybe I'll try to summarize. I don't know how many minutes I have left. Oh, I got lots of time. I went very quickly, and maybe we can have some conversation about it. I think it's somewhat of a depressing thought, but it ain't easy to make a revolution an arms struggle and successfully transform the society into a more humane and environmentally sound or sane society. It is very difficult and maybe impossible to do it through the electoral process, because it is through the electoral process it's very difficult to get hold of the power structure. I mean, this is an issue right now in Venezuela where they are doing wonderful things mixed in with all sorts of crazy nonsense that's happening at the same time, corruption and other issues that are going on. which is not unheard of in Latin America, by the way, not unheard of in the United States either, of course. But you have some fantastic things going on. They're actually using their resources, oil money, to feed the people. I mean, strange thing. I mean, there was a story in the paper, and I think it was New York Times, that Chavez is trying to buy off the people, because of the election in 2012. What does it mean? What it means is instead of these resources going to the wealthy, it's actually going to the people to build houses for them, to feed them. It's feeding like 1 million people a day in Venezuela through this system of feeding houses, 1 meal a day. And one of the most exciting things in Venezuela, there's some 20,000 to 30,000 community councils, which were formed, started to be formed some few years back. And basically these are 100 to 400 families. In cities are divided up so that you have, the idea is to divide them up so that you're sort of like similar people, a similar situation. I mean, it's not gerrymandered, trying to get, some people from here, some people there. It really tried to do the geographic area. And what's the importance of these councils, of the community councils? They are being asked to decide what are their priorities for infrastructure investment in their communities. And they actually rank them. And I visited them. I mean, this is not just a theoretical issue. I've visited them and seen what they have done. Do they feel that the first priority is a clinic? Do they feel the first priority is a school? Do they need paved roads, electricity? Do they need to bring water to their into their villages? And then the government provides them funds. And I know these are oil monies. There's no question about it, and there are issues involved with that. But they're providing the funds and the expertise for people to do it. A lot of it is being done with volunteer labor. We visited one village where there was the community council had decided the women got fed up with hauling water. The men were away. They just got fed up with it, and they wanted to connect. There was a water main, I've forgotten what it was, like a kilometer away, not very far from the village, and they wanted to connect up with that water main. So they put in a proposal to do that. And they got the money to do it, and they got the expertise, and they put in the labor. So these women dug the ditches, they laid the pipes, connected the pipes to every individual house so that they could get running water in every house in the village. They had money left over, and they petitioned the government, the national government, to use the money to build a community center where they could have some meetings, they could have some cultural activities and things like that. And it was agreed upon, and they built that too with the same money that they were given for the water. So, I mean, you have things like this that are which are just extraordinary. So it's not just we're getting together at the community level to talk, which is okay, but we're getting together at the community level to talk about our problems and how we can solve them, and hopefully we can get some money to solve them. But once that starts, you get a lot of spirit that enables things to happen that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So, so there are things happening that are good, and there are things happening that are good within the interstices of capitalism itself. You have things, I don't know, presumably up here you have them as well, like community-supported farms, community-supported agriculture, where they're essentially non-capitalist. They're trying to get away from the middleman. They're just growing farmers are growing food for people. They're not growing food to sell as a commodity, and they're growing food for people who are paying them some money. So there are things that can change within the system, and these are good because they show us examples of what can happen. But if you want really complete systemic change, we got to figure out a way to do it. And it's not easy, and it's not easy through whatever process you want to use. There are stumbling blocks in the process. And this doesn't mean we shouldn't be thinking about it and doing stuff. It just means we need to think harder and to try to do a better job next time, or this time. So I think I'll leave it at that. But the issues of especially of trying to change in a democracy, you see them played out right now in Venezuela. You see them played out right now in in Ecuador and in Bolivia especially. It's very, very difficult because the old power structure is basically there. And so they're trying to build a new society within an old society. That ain't easy. Anyhow, so when I started wrapping this up in my own mind, I said, Jesus, that is a terribly depressing pitch or story there. And in a way it is, but I think we have to face it. The reality is it ain't easy to make systemic change. And we've got to keep thinking about it. We've got to find new ways to do it.